You want? No, yeah.
House Committee on Labor will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Hatzma. Here. Representatives Menser,
Here.
Bolzar, O'Neill,
Present.
Andrews,
Here.
Churches,
Present.
Wagella,
Here.
Wozniak, Mueller,
Here.
Coontz.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the May 25, 2023 meeting? Somebody?
Yes, sir.
Representative Coontz so moves. The minutes are adopted. We're here this morning to receive testimony on House Bill 4034. I'd like to invite Representative Hope to present her bill to the committee.
Good morning, Chair Hatzma, committee members. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here today. This is Mr. Chris White, and we'll hear from him a little bit later, but I wanted to introduce him. He's from the Restaurant Opportunity Center. So, I don't talk about myself very often, but I'm going to right now just because I think it helps explain why this particular piece of legislation is important to me and important in general. So I grew up in a union household. My dad had a GED. He had no education beyond that. My mom had a high school diploma. But during the 70s and the 80s when I was growing up, they were able to provide a nice middle-class life for us. They were able to take us to the doctor, the dentist whenever we needed. They were able to do extra things like vacations, and they were able to save money, which is something that's all too rare right now. The money they saved helped me pay for my education at Michigan State University, making me the first person in my family to graduate from college. I since went on to law school and I made it here eventually, so I feel like that's a pretty good American dream story where the next generation does a little bit better than the previous generation. And I'm so sad, and one of the reasons that I actually ever ran for office was because I think that dream is dying, which is tragic, really. So the bill before us is based on two pretty basic premises. One, that work should be rewarded, and two, that workers should be treated fairly and humanely. So, the need. Why is this bill needed? Well, a lot of people who find themselves working for temporary agencies find themselves working basically for poverty wages. Not everybody. There's the notable exception of temporary nurses. They've managed to make a good living at taking temporary assignments, but in other fields like warehousing, manufacturing, construction, service industry, many of these workers end up on public assistance. They're also subject to wage theft. Temp agencies will sort of nickel and dime them, make them pay for their transportation to the job site, for meals that they may or may not eat, for equipment that they need to do their work. And that can result in them actually making less than minimum wage. They're paid less typically for the same work at a job site, so if they're working right next to someone who's a permanent employee, doing the same exact thing every day, they're almost certainly paid considerably less than their neighbor. They're often misled about the availability of a permanent position, which makes them tolerate some of these other things. The wage theft and the low pay, they'll put up with that with the promise of a full-time position, which doesn't materialize sometimes for years or ever. They're kept in the dark about their job assignments from day to day. They're kept in the dark about how long they'll be working. And I'm saying this broadly. This doesn't happen to everybody, but this is a problem. So they're kept in the dark about how much money they'll be making, the work they'll be doing, and even sometimes where they're going. And if they complain, they're retaliated against. And because they are poor, they're more likely to stick around because even with the retaliation that cuts into their weekly check, they still need that work, and there's not really a lot else they can find. So the details of this bill, there are provisions in here for pay. So one thing is that even after some charges which are allowed in this bill at fair market value, you cannot end up paying the person less than the federal or state minimum wage. There are restrictions in here on the charges that a temporary agency can charge an employee. Like I said, fair market value, and they're not allowed to charge for transportation and some other things. This bill encourages but does not require that if a permanent position comes open, that the temporary worker is sort of first on the list to have that job offered to them, and that they will not be penalized if they accept a permanent position. Sometimes that happens. This bill requires transparency on two fronts. One for the temporary workers, so they know what they're going to be making, where they're going to be going, how much money they will make, etc. All pretty basic information that I think every worker is entitled to. And then for the public, because this requires temp agencies to register with the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department, LEO. So the public will be able to see whether the temp agency they're considering working through is registered with the state. I have a lot of facts and figures here. I don't know that it's necessarily helpful to hear a lot of those, but I will share a couple. So I mentioned government assistance. 36% of temporary workers report receiving some form of government assistance while they work through a temp agency. 24% experienced wage theft, and that means they're charged improperly or penalized in some way. And a whopping 71% reported experiencing retaliation when they had the temerity to complain about conditions in their temporary work assignment. So there's a lot in the bill. There are a lot of details, and I'm happy to go through them in turn, but I would like to turn it over now to Mr. White to talk about temporary working from the worker's experience point of view.
Thank you, Representative Holt. And good morning, Honorable Committee and Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris White, Director of Restaurant Opportunity Centers of Michigan, and it is my honor and duty to stand before you on behalf of restaurant workers. We have roughly 6,000, we're a worker center, we have roughly 6,000 members, and some are restaurant workers and some are not that support us. We have several affiliates and different organizations that believe that this bill is the way to go. The mission of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers of Michigan is to build power for restaurant workers who have historically been excluded from the full benefits of minimum wage and other basic labor protections and paid sick leave. The Temporary Workers Bill of Rights, House Bill 4034, would help support restaurant workers and other vulnerable workers across the state by preventing the erosion of basic labor, fundamental labor rights. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are roughly 312,000 restaurant workers across Michigan, nearly 20% of who live in poverty. At a rate 3 times that of the general population, 58% of restaurant workers are women, 32% of whom are mothers. In Metro Detroit, just to take a little snapshot and a little sample, 74% of the workforce is African American and 9% is Hispanic. And at a time when the industry is facing severe labor shortage, instead of raising wages to attract more workers, many restaurants are turning to temporary staffing agencies, also known as TLSAs. TLSAs across the state are offering to fill line cook, dishwashers, hosts, bussers, servers, bartenders, and management positions. Now, as we exit the pandemic, we have an opportunity to re-envision the labor market so that it provides long-term jobs with employer-sponsored benefits. We do not need to accept the pre-pandemic trend of short-term, increasingly precarious jobs with low wages, few if any benefits, and obstacles to concerted activities. Now, in the past environments, many employers relied on second-tier workforce provided by temp agencies, leading to higher growth rates of temp jobs than within the private sector. Temp agencies act as employers of record, even though the company that contracts with the temp agency decides the work duties and provides supervision. Temp agencies compete on labor costs, leading them to drive down wages and cut corners on worker protections such as minimum wage, health, and safety laws. The contracting company pleads ignorance of unfair or illegal working conditions since they are not the employer of record, thereby avoiding responsibility for the workers and ensuring the business continues to function. Now, House Bill 4034 goes a long way towards addressing some of the exploited conduct that temporary workers in Michigan can face. It provides workers with an employment notice at the time of dispatch that includes description of terms and conditions of employment. This dispatch also prevents temporary labor agencies from sending temporary workers to a job site where there's a strike, a lockout, or other labor troubles that may exist. Another thing that we believe at ROC that's good about this piece of legislation that you all don't mind, I can refer to it as the Hope Bill.
Okay.
How you think?
I don't have a problem with that.
All right, it's giving our workers hope. It provides that each worker sent to a third-party client who isn't utilized must be paid a minimum of 4 hours at the agreed-upon rate. And this is important. It shall not charge a temporary worker for a consumer report, criminal background check, or drug test. And this is important because as we deal with these economic times, what may seem like small costs are very large considering how many individuals you have that you take care of at home, do you take care of a parent, and so forth, and school-aged children. So these costs add up. Keep and maintain detailed records relating to everyday laborers worked for 7 years, and provides charging workers for transportation, as the Honorable Representative said, from the agency to the work site. So it's very important that we pass this legislation on to the floor. And like we said, the Hope Bill gives hope to a lot of our workers, and it helps to develop a more stable economy within the state of Michigan. And thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Hope. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions of either Representative Hope or of Mr. White? Representative Andrews.
Question for either of you. How often would you say that temporary workers are used to fill positions that could be filled by full-time workers, but instead temporary workers are used in order to skirt having to pay benefits and basic protections and that sort of thing?
Well, I don't have the data right in front of me. We are working with Leo to get some concrete figures for some of those basic questions, but I would surmise that nearly all temp workers are filling a position that could be filled by a full-time person, with the possible exception of temporary, assignments. In other words, if something's taking place on a temporary basis, then those are true temp jobs, but otherwise, the temps are taking a position that could be filled by a full-time or a part-time worker. You wanna elaborate?
Yes. And what we're finding at our Restaurant Opportunity Center is that the workers are starting to feel exploited, and they want that opportunity to be able to work within the company, and it's a conflict there. And you're between a rock and another rock because you're forced to try to, you have to continue to eat, but at the same time, you don't like the conditions.
Yeah, well, rightfully so, because it is exploitative. Thank you.
Representative Kuntz.
Thank you, Chair Hasma. Are we just taking testimony today? Yes. Outstanding, thank you. Mr. White and Representative Hope, thank you both for coming today. I'm not sure we're qualified to talk about the intent of someone. When we sit here and say, well, they're doing this because, that is pure speculation. I don't think any of us in this room are qualified to say, here's why someone is doing something. Can you agree with that?
Well, the individual, what we're basing our, at ROC, we're basing upon what individuals that our members, so we're representing the views of our members. Now, we would hope that this type of conduct isn't happening. And when you're a worker center and working for the rights of people, it's a job that, you have a hard time coming to do because the conditions that exist. So I understand what you're saying, but unfortunately, this is what we're dealing with and have to address.
I do appreciate your use of the word hope again. You're doing very well with that.
I promise I didn't ask him to do that. So you're right, we don't know what's going on in someone's mind unless they tell us explicitly, but we can take in the circumstances and use our common sense and reason to say, looks like this is the reason. When it comes to business decisions, I think we could all agree that businesses make decisions based on their ability to maximize profit. So I don't think that's looking into someone's mind. I think that's just a general accepted premise of business.
We have what is called the high road philosophy, which is an ethical, pragmatic way of conducting business, and we believe strongly that when business is conducted that way, it increases the profit margin because it eliminates different types of lawsuits based upon discrimination and things of that nature.
Outstanding. And Mr. Chairman, I hope we're in a good mood today. We had talked about unemployment, and our beloved governor came out with a 3.8% unemployment rate. Are we trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist? How many jobs are available right now? We are beyond full employment. When I drive by, there are help wanted signs everywhere. And now we're trying to make it harder for people to move jobs. I don't understand. We're talking about exploitation. There are more jobs available now than there have been. Again, I don't have the data in front of me. We're at full employment. There are jobs available. Where are we going? What's the problem we're solving here? Can't people move jobs?
Sure, people can move jobs. I don't think the assumption that just because we do have a great unemployment rate in Michigan right now means that there aren't temporary workers in use. And I apologize that I don't have the numbers right in front of me.
There's a lot of data, no doubt.
Yeah, and like I said, Leo is putting those numbers together for us. Yeah, I mean, like Mr. White said, and I'll let him elaborate too, it's a business decision. And instead of using their resources to attract more workers, they're keeping pay low, they're keeping conditions poor, and some positions remain open. Some employers have trouble for a long time, finding people who are willing to work in those conditions.
And some of our research that we did in our research department showed that you're going to have the help wanted signs, and some of the people that we've interviewed said that their concern was working conditions. See, and that's why some have chose not to. That's why you have some help wanted signs within some of the restaurants in the industry. So that's some of what we've uncovered.
And then, if I may,
One more, please.
I absolutely, and thank you for that on that.
welcome.
We've left out the glaring issue here. We've talked everything about Mrs. Ford, or Mrs. Lincoln's play, except the exciting part, that we cannot supply workers if there's a strike. That is the entire crux of this bill. That is the most important thing. We seem to have missed that discussion. And again, I don't want to spend days going over my data, but that's in direct conflict with the National Labor Relations Act. I mean, do you have data on that? Would you like me to share that?
No, and I don't appreciate the implication that we are trying to hide that. Mr. White mentioned that in his opening remarks. It is an important piece of the bill. I won't, attempt to mislead you on that, but it's all important. The exploitation prevention measures, the public transparency, the transparency with the workers themselves, it's all important.
And it's also, to echo what Rep. Hope says, it's the voice of some of the workers. I'm here because I'm representing a population that helps keep the state and the country going, the restaurant workers.
Sure.
And this is some of the views of them.
We're all here representing a
That's what I was
population.
about to say. I was about to say.
We're all here.
The difference
I
is
understand.
I wasn't elected.
But the conflict with the NLRA, can we talk about that? Do we hope there's no conflict? I had to say it.
There's not, well,
Okay.
I appreciate the
call out. There you go.
call out, yeah, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
I'm
but-
going for quote of the day on that, so.
Okay, hey, if it works, that's great. It doesn't violate the NLRA, and I'm not prepared to speak extensively on that right now, but I'm happy to have that discussion with you offline.
And I'll just forward you the email. I think it'd be easier, because I have pages of Supreme Court rulings that it does. But let me just forward those to you, because
Okay.
in the essence of time, and thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you both.
Representative Wegela.
Chair, it's Wagella, but I'll give you a pass. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. I just have a couple comments and then I think a question. But first off, as someone who has had to work multiple jobs multiple times in my life, I am hopeful that one day, one job that you work full time will be enough to survive in this country. That is not the case right now, and I think that is why looking at unemployment statistics is a really bad measure of how the economy is doing, because people can't afford rent, they can't afford their daily bills, they can't afford childcare, they can't afford their health, to keep their health up, to afford health insurance. The list goes on. I think we're in a crisis of the working class here. That being said, if you look at temp workers, you mentioned in your testimony that 36% are on government assistance. And I think that's really interesting, because when we talk about like the motivation to have temp workers, right? We're looking at a for-profit company, right? So by definition, any job you work for a for-profit company, they are not paying you your productivity because they need to make a profit off of you. Now, temp industries are so interesting to me because not only are you not being paid for your productivity right away from the company, just being employed, but it's a double dip, right? The temp company then takes even more of that productivity profit from you for their own profits. So you're kind of being exploited almost twice. And I think that's really interesting. What your bill does, which I love, is it provides clarity for workers. It protects their wages and to make sure that there's a standard and there's a playing field there, and I really, really, truly appreciate that. The last thing I'll do here is, from 2008 to 2018, the temp workers in the United States grew by 75%. Right? I think that's really important to note. So do you believe, and I don't think anyone in here would say that someone's full-time job should be a temp job. So do you think that your bill will have the effect of lowering the amount of temp workers and maybe encouraging workers to hire on more full-time positions as we move forward? Do you get that sense?
I don't think this bill will hurt the temp industry or hurt business in general. And the reason I say that is because this law or very similar legislation is in effect in other states. One being New Jersey, which is home to a lot of warehousing operations that do rely on temp agencies. I appreciate you mentioning the growth in this industry. During the pandemic, it grew even more. In 2021, the temp agencies brought in $157 billion. So I really don't believe that's going to affect the industry negatively. It does require some more of them. I don't think, this isn't going to be off limits to them as a business, practice, but it does protect the worker, and that's really what I'm interested in doing.
Can I clarify my question? Sorry, I think what I was trying to ask was, would it decentivize companies from making the conscious decision to hire temp employees rather than full-time employees? Because we've seen an increase in the amount of temp workers over time. And I say that because I feel like the temp industry in general is exploitative, and what your bill seems to do is provide rights for temp workers, which might, in my mind, discourage companies who are using it in an exploitative way, which is not all companies. Would that change their perspective, potentially?
Yeah, my hope is that this will lead to more people being employed on a permanent basis. And like you said, being able to survive off one job. I think a lot of times, I mentioned my family's story and the savings component of that story, which really benefited me considerably, because people can't save money now. They get trapped in a, kind of a cycle of low pay and debt, and it's hard for them to break out. If this helps them break out, I couldn't be more pleased. I hope that is the effect, that maybe more places will consider bringing people on a permanent basis instead of relying on temps. Do you understand?
And I think the worker protections are key. For example, I have a 19-year-old son. He has autism spectrum disorder. He's a junior at Michigan State, but he's moderate severe. Okay, so it's not Asperger's. So when we talk about protections, the population is growing of people with autism. Now, as we look at that, we're talking about a whole entire workforce that's going to change over the next 15, 20 years. If we get ahead of this now and start to deal with these worker protections, then it will make a stronger industry, a more inclusive industry. So in addition to the work that we do, we see that in our restaurant workers, people who have ASD that are cooks and want to become managers. So it's a whole lot of research, and it's a whole lot of factors that we have to consider as we move this legislation and others forward.
Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Considering the restaurant industry has lost over 3,000 restaurants during the pandemic, there's not going to be really any place for temporary workers or any workers to work if we keep on going down this path with these regulations that we're going to be putting on small businesses. So, you know, we have to really look at that, and as well as, you know, do you know what the average tip worker makes an hour?
It depends on the restaurant. And also, I would also say that I think, and the people we represent feel that with the protections, it strengthens the industry, and that it would make it actually more attractive, and it will move some viewpoints of it from not just a job, but a career path.
I understand. And, you know, the thing is the average tip worker makes about $27 an hour. Yeah, there's going to be tip workers that work at Andiamo's that make more than the ones that work at Little Caesars, right? But, but I mean, this isn't just an issue of restaurants. This is an issue that goes across many different things, hospitals, nurses, traveling nurses, you know, and then it all goes back to supply chain issues. But at the end of the day, we're going to make more burdensome regulations for small business owners to follow by tracking all this stuff when small businesses are going out of business because they can't find workers. So I think we really need to look at the big picture of this. Is this a way to, are you trying to like unionize tip workers or restaurant workers? Is that what it is going down? Or are we just trying to get you're trying to get more protection for workers, but if there's no place to work, it doesn't really matter, does it?
We're a worker center, so yeah, so we're not trying to unionize. We're a worker center. What is happening is that from talking to the actual workers and the people in the industry, they're stating clearly that it's an issue of working conditions. So that's something that will be probably debated for a little bit longer than today. So we know that, but this is what we're seeing, and what's happening is where there are good working conditions, opportunities for advancement, then you will see stability within that restaurant and a stronger industry. And temp agencies have to come into the fold, those that aren't, and we need to start to move in that direction. And that makes a stronger, healthy economy for the state of Michigan.
All right, thank you. And just one last thing, Mr. Chair, really quick. You mentioned something about New Jersey having a similar legislation. Isn't it true that New Jersey lost population and now we're forming a commission to gain population? So when we have a bill that has similar characteristics to New Jersey and they lose population, and then we're creating a commission to get more population, and then we do a bill similar to this, isn't that counterproductive?
Well, I'm not familiar with the population trends in New Jersey. I'll just be really frank about that. But I know that correlation isn't necessarily causation. So the fact that population has decreased, if I accept that premise, I don't think it's we don't know enough to attribute the population loss to connection to a temporary workers' bill of rights or vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Churches.
Thank you. So I always, I appreciate you coming in today and explaining the work that you've done on this bill. So I was a teacher and I went to college and I was a waitress and a preschool teacher. And it was pretty hard to be able to pay for college and have those two jobs and then go to school in the afternoons and evenings and be at a commuter school. So I kind of understand slightly, just a little bit, because I also had help from a really supportive family of how hard it is to make money working in a restaurant and how tiring that work can be. So I appreciate what you are saying. I also, coming at it from an educator's lens, when I hear the word substitute teacher or temp worker, I find it to be elitist, and I always would call my subs guest teachers. That's what my classroom called these people, because they are guests in our school and they are educating students. Temp workers overall it doesn't sound respectful, in my opinion. So I think the way in which we use our language is something that we should examine going forward in the future. But what Rep. Mueller said, I've spoken with business leaders in my district, and some of these businesses would have similar concerns to what he expressed of they're paying their staff quite well, if, in my opinion. They're making a good wage, and they really enjoy their working experience, and these business owners really take pride in what they're doing. But the equity of that is not everywhere. There are some really good, outstanding examples of business owners who really are mindful of giving their workers time to go to their kids' concert after work, or making sure that they're able to make X amount of dollars and have X amount of hours per week. And if they have to take a day off, picking up another shift. Those things are conversations that I've had with business owners, but there are also other businesses that aren't putting workers first and they're not being held accountable. Would you say that this bill strives to restore respect in the hospitality space and create more equity so that workers are given a fairer shake?
Absolutely. And regarding the vocabulary, I'm just using the vocabulary that already exists when I say temp workers. I mean no disrespect.
Oh no, I don't mean any disrespect,
Okay.
but I'm just highlighting that, I mean, we could come up with maybe a better word nowadays.
Sure. Yeah, and this is meant to raise standards for folks who do work in those jobs, being placed through a temporary labor service agency. It gives them first crack at a permanent job if it comes open. This legislation does, or it encourages that. By protecting their wages from wage theft, by ensuring that they at least make minimum wage, which I think is egregious. I think that's, obviously beneficial to them, but I think it's beneficial to all of us. They'll have more money to put into the economy. Perhaps they can get off government assistance, and that benefits everybody too. It's about kind of getting trapped, like getting trapped in a cycle of low pay and debt. And I've said it's like a hamster wheel. You're running and running and not getting anywhere. There's so many families like that, and there are a lot of reasons that exists right now. But any bit we can do to help those folks, that's what I am hoping to achieve with this bill.
Thank you, Representative Hope.
Representative Wagella.
Just a quick question. What percentage of a temporary worker's salary does a temp agency charge or take?
It varies pretty widely. They're paid based on the so the hourly fee that they pay can range from 30% and up. So it's considerable. It's a lucrative industry, like I said, and a growing industry. And those aren't negatives. Those aren't disparagement. That's just it's a fact. And I don't believe that this regulation that really requires that workers are treated fairly, that they're compensated for their work, that they're treated humanely. I don't think that's bad for business.
So follow up, and just for clarity, so the bill, all it does is provide protections for temp workers. It does not regulate the fees that are calculated or the percentage, right? Just saying that, recognizing, hey, these workers who are getting paid much less than the production of their actual work and their labor are being protected a little bit more.
That's right.
Thank you, Representative Hope. Thank you, Mr. White, for your testimony this morning.
Representative Hadsma, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do have another guest on Zoom. If you're willing to
I plan to hear from her in just a moment.
Okay, I'm
but
sorry.
First, I'm going to hear from Monica Martinez
Okay.
from MLC, representing the American Staffing Association.
Thank you. My name is Monica Martinez. I'm here with Michigan Legislative Consultants on behalf of the American Staffing Association. Provided everyone a memo, a letter that went out to the committee and to this bill sponsor, just detailing some of the concerns on there. And we just look forward to working with both you, Ms. Chair Hadsma, as well as the bill sponsor as we move forward. And that's all I have for today. Very brief remarks.
Thank you. And Representative Hope, we do now have Aisha Wells from the group Mothering Justice available by Zoom. Go ahead, Ms. Wells, and welcome.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Again, my name is Aisha Wells, and I'm the co-deputy director of organizing at Mothering Justice. Just a little bit about Mothering Justice. We're a policy advocacy organization that empowers Black and brown mamas of color to take action on policy issues that will improve the quality of health and economic justice issues for families, not just in Michigan, but around the country. We do that through our Mama's Agenda, which was curated by Black and brown mamas in the community. The Mama's Agenda consists of 4 main issues: Black maternal health, reproductive justice, which means that Black women die 3 to 4 times more likely than their white counterparts, and every woman should be able to choose when to welcome a family. Paid family and medical leave. No one should have to choose between care from themselves or their loved ones and not be able to pay their bills. Basic needs, that everyone has the right to food, water, shelter, and health coverages. And affordable childcare. Childcare should be quality, it should be affordable, and it should be accessible. That said, Mothering Justice supports HB 4034 because it protects mamas who work for temporary agencies. And just to name a few of the reasons why we support the bill is, first, why are we sending mamas to locations where there are strikes or other labor disputes? This bill is about safety, it's about dignity, and it's about respect. That means they'll be sent to places where they can be comfortable and not mistreated at work. This bill also includes employee notices and record-keeping provisions, ensuring detailed record keeping of their positions while employed, which will provide transparency in their work. We need laws that protect working mothers and help provide opportunities for full-time employees. And I say that because 2/3 of working mothers are breadwinners, and that was before the pandemic. And we also saw that during the pandemic that we need to stop only thinking of small businesses. We need to also think about workers and business that work together. Many businesses closed their doors because they didn't have workers. So we have to understand that workers are at the forefront of your business as well. And we have to work together. This is not just a small business or a worker. We have to have both. All of these provisions are just common sense, and they cut exploitation of mamas in the workforce. I am a mom. I have a disabled son. He has cerebral palsy, hydrocephalus, epilepsy. He has hearing loss. And that is what motivates me to continue to fight for equitable workplaces at Mothering Justice. That's why we are fighting so hard, not just for this bill, but also for paid leave, which was introduced back in May 11th. So similarly to this bill, it will add to safety and well-being for mamas who work. So today, I appreciate Reps Hope, Brixey, Turner Glue, Andrews, Snyder, Wilson, Devendroff, Young, Hood, and Ring, and this committee of thinking of, in the Labor Committee of thinking of working mamas. Thank you all for having me here.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Questions? We don't have any questions for you. Thank you for participating this morning.
Thank you so
I
much.
think you can hang on and observe the rest of the meeting if you'd like.
Sure.
We next have testimony from Wendy Block from the Michigan Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Wendy Block. I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement for the Michigan Chamber. The Michigan Chamber is a statewide business association. We represent approximately 5,000 members across our great state. Those are businesses ranging from small to large across all industries, and are happy to be here today and appreciate your time. So I'm here today to express our concerns with House Bill 4034 as written. First and most important point probably is that state and local ordinances that seek to regulate strike activity present issues under the National Labor Relations Act, or the NLRA, and would be preempted. As is the case, the language on page 3 prohibiting a temporary staffing or prohibiting a temporary service agency from providing temporary workers to job sites where there is a strike, a lockout, or other ongoing labor dispute is preempted by the NLRA. This is based on the U.S. Supreme Court's 1976 decision, Machinist Lodge, which found the placement of temporary labor at striking locations is an activity that Congress decided would remain unregulated. A challenge to a similar law passed in New Jersey was deemed unconstitutional by the New Jersey Supreme Court in 1982 in a U.S. Chamber case versus the state. In that case, the court held that the New Jersey Act was preempted by federal law as to employees and employers falling under within the National Labor Relations Act. Federal preemption in the private sector stems from the U.S. Supreme Court's interpretation of the NLRA beginning in 1959 with the case San Diego Building Trades versus Garmond. It has consistently been recognized that since that time that there is preemption in this area, and it expands to the entire subject matter of the NLRA, which makes the legislation generally problematic, if not impermissible, under the NLRA. Outside the preemption issue, the language prohibiting replacement workers in the instance of a strike or a lockout or other dispute is problematic for several reasons. I'm going to quickly walk through those. First of all, protections already exist for striking workers. In fact, a 2016 decision by the NLRB specified that it is a violation of the NLRA to hire permanent replacements during an economic strike to punish striking employees and to avoid future strikes. Taking this ban a step further by prohibiting temporary workers would make it more difficult and costly for employers to operate, service employees and customers, deliver or manufacture products during a work stoppage. While the goal of the legislation may be to bring a company to its knees during a labor dispute, we would consider what message that sends and how this legislation would impact investment in our state. When businesses are discouraged from investing and setting up or developing or expanding operations or hiring labor, the result is that fewer jobs are created. Looking at this bill through that lens raises questions about how the bill might end up hurting the very workers it purports to help. Another consideration relates to the hiring of temporary workers is the impact on safety. So this bill would restrict facilities from hiring temporary workers to deal things like when there's a strike, air emissions and quality, oil, gas, and other chemicals in plants, and more. Companies can't abandon their sites when there's a labor dispute, and many of the individuals responsible for the safety of those facilities are unionized. So not being able to hire temporary workers to deal with these significant threats, things like threats to the environment and the health and safety of employees or the general population, is a problem. It can also be a problem for neighboring communities. Finally, there's questions about what's included in the definition of labor dispute. So the bill talks about strikes, it talks about lockouts, and then it talks about other labor disputes and what exactly is intended by that. So I do think that language, at the very least, will need to be cleaned up, because I don't think anybody knows. We've had a lot of questions about what else might be included. I'm going to close by bringing your attention to the definition of temporary labor service agency and temporary laborer. Based on the last testimony, I'm not now sure. I guess I thought that the bill was targeted at day laborers, but it does seem like maybe the intent is to cover all temporary staffing firms and temporary workers, which we believe it does today. This would impact businesses of all sizes and types who rely on temporary staffing agencies to fill their workforce needs. This is especially problematic right now as we're facing a workforce shortage. Many of our members who would love to hire workers are not able to do so and have to turn to temporary agencies to fill those gaps so they can service their customers, they can fulfill orders, they can deal with supply chain issues, and this legislation would essentially create so many barriers for temporary staffing agencies that many of them would no longer want to service employers across our state. The broad scope of the bill is especially problematic when you consider the onerous reporting mandates in sections 7, 15, 19, 23, 31. These are both on the agency and the client, meaning the business who is relying on the temporary staffing employee. And so we question who benefits from these reporting requirements, especially given the protections under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is a federal act, which require employers to keep sufficient records, to have all sorts of things available and ready for inspection. And this, we're just wondering what is the benefit of all of these requirements. Other problematic provisions include sections 7 and 23, which require agencies to provide on-demand access to all of their contracts and all of their invoices. And to file these items with the state on an annual basis, you're talking about reams and reams of paperwork that would need to be filed. We're not sure who's going to be looking at them or what the purpose is. There's pay stub provisions in Section 15, which require things to be reported to the worker on a daily basis, even for professionals who are highly compensated, who would probably be like, why am I getting this? And then the provisions in Section 19, which arbitrarily cap permanent placement fees. We're concerned about how this might affect whether temporary staffing agencies continue to operate in the space. And it is important to remember that the fee that the agency receives is on top of the wage. It isn't deducted from the employee's paycheck. So if you're paying someone $15 an hour, you might pay 20% or whatever percent on top of that as a contractual fee, but the business pays that fee, not the employee who's being placed. So I'm going to conclude by saying it's important to remember that punishing or even eliminating the temporary staffing industry in Michigan will diminish opportunities for workers, not increase them. This is just a real big problem in this time that we're in, where businesses are scrambling to find workers to fill jobs. So this concludes my testimony. It's our hope that these concerns are viewed as constructive in nature and warranting further discussion and dialogue. So thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Block. Representative Wagella.
Thanks for your testimony. So you were talking about how, and I think there's no secret here, right? People are having a hard time filling their positions.
Yeah.
But I think this is something worthy of talking about because, like, clearly people are going to temp agencies to find employment. So there's a need from workers to find jobs, but they're not finding certain jobs. So I guess my question is, why do you think employers are unable to fill positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we knew that's the $10 million question, right? I mean, all of our members are saying we've got these jobs, we are paying historic wages. I mean, wages are at well above what we would traditionally believe to be market rates. Employers are offering generous benefits to try to kind of differentiate themselves from their competitors. They're offering hybrid options, if not remote work. They're trying to meet employees where they are, like to try to attract and retain them, right? And yet everyone's having the same problem. And it comes back to this population issue. We are not growing population, we're losing population in Michigan. So everyone is competing for the same number of jobs. And so there's just like a lot of poaching going on between employers because we're not adding additional workers to the mix and we're seeing attrition because of retirement. So the problem is just becoming bigger and bigger as we go along. And until we solve that problem, there's going to continue to be labor shortages. And frankly, people go to temporary staffing agencies because they have a pool of people that are available. And why people are going to the temporary agency rather than going directly to the job, I don't know, but people are. I mean, we have been trying to hire an administrative assistant for quite some time now and been unable, and we're offering a really good wage. And so we've had to rely on a temporary agency. And that's not where we want to be. We don't want to pay that fee on top of the wage that we're going to offer, but that has been the option and the only option available. And there's so many examples of that going on across the state.
Yeah, I think I want to push back slightly on that analysis because to me, I think the answer is pretty simple, right? Wages aren't high enough, benefits aren't good enough, working conditions aren't good enough for workers, right? I mean, and there's been many stories out there where when employees go through the interview process, right, there are not a lot of laws right now where workers can get a clear identification of what salary is, right? Or when they get their final offer, it's not what was advertised, right? Or there's this range and it's at the low end of the range. There's a whole list, I think, of reasons that have been published in the news quite frequently about why workers are in the Great Resignation. But my thing I'm not connecting here is how this would make there be less temp workers, or why workers would go to a temp agency rather than take a job. I truly believe that what's happening is employers who are making record profits right now as well are going to the temp agency because it's a cost-effective option for their business.
So there's a lot there to unpack. And I think if you're going to do well in this market, you need to be paying at those high levels, right? And if you don't, you kind of proceed at your own risk. But this idea that, businesses don't want to, and we had this discussion last time I was here, businesses don't want to do right by their employees and that they're all about the profit. Sure, they have to make money. I mean, that's part of the reason you have a business. But, those businesses that aren't paying or trying to underpay and not do right by their employees, those are the ones that are going to suffer and probably go under. But again, I think the problem here is you're trying to add so many regulations to these entities who are trying to fill in a gap, in a much needed gap, to the point where some may just say, well, we're not going to do this anymore. And you may say that that's a good thing. My members would say it's a bad thing because they have to turn to these agencies because they've run out of options.
But the argument that you're making is that by us giving temp workers more rights and structure, that we're going to have less people in the job market. I don't think any worker is consciously saying, I would rather be a temp employee where an agency is getting part of my salary than be a full-time employee.
But they're not getting
a
portion of the salary.
Stand up?
They're not getting a portion of the salary. The business is paying the fee to the agency.
Would be
and
paid that fee if it wasn't the agency.
I mean, it's just like any other business cost, right? It's a cost of doing business to rely on the temporary agency. It doesn't mean that the employee is making less. So, we may have to agree to disagree on this one, but I'm not sure how adding all of these regulations and all of these requirements on not only the temporary agency, but the employer that is employing them, I'm not sure how any of that really ends up beneficial to the worker. Like what is the problem that we're seeking to address? And even the things that I'm hearing about, like, oh, people need to pay higher wages, they need to pay better benefits, that like this is somehow people can't pay for the basic cost of living. I'm not sure how this bill fixes any of that, other than just eliminating an option for employers who are struggling to find workers.
Just looking at my chair here, we heard in testimony 24% of temp.
But how does this bill fix that?
Fix what directly?
All those statistics. How does this bill fix that?
I think it provides workers. 24% of temporary workers are facing wage theft. 70% are being retaliated against. This protects workers from facing those things, which is an important thing.
How do they not have the ability to report those issues to the department today? I mean, the avenues to report those things and the protections that are there, if I'm not mistaken, already exist. This is just putting them under a bill regulating temporary staffing agencies. But if you have an unfair labor practice, you can file a complaint with the federal NLRB. If you're protected by the NLRA, you can go to Leo and file a complaint there. Like, these avenues already exist. And but the bill is about so much more than that. That stuff is the easy stuff, right? Like, I don't think anybody should say somebody shouldn't be able to file a complaint with the state if there's an issue with wage theft. Wage theft is illegal. Like, it's illegal. So that language isn't necessary in this bill. Put it there. That's fine. But I'm more concerned with the other provisions.
Representative Wagella, we may come back to you, but Representative Kuntz now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Brock, for coming. You've gone from discussing a potpourri bill to macroeconomics to defending capitalism. That was a wide-ranging testimony, and I thank you for it. I do have to disagree with one of your statements. The state of Michigan has been very successful in adding employees. Seems as though the government never runs out of money. You had mentioned the machinists. You mentioned several issues that preempt this with the NLRA. Mm-hmm. You didn't mention the 520 Michigan Avenue, Caterpillar versus Lyons, Chestgate Nursing, South Union versus Rhode Island, Chamber of Commerce versus Reich. You didn't mention the Employers Association versus United Steelworkers, which all make this bill unlawful. My question to you, and I'm not going to ask you to share your whole testimony, would you share the bills that you referenced regarding the conflict with the NLRA with Chair Hadsma or with the committee?
I'd be happy to.
Please and thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Kuntz. Thank you, Ms.
Okay,
Block, for your
thank you.
testimony. We have several cards from different visitors, guests, as I heard before, who don't wish to speak. So supporting the bill, Tom Leonard from 6 Action. Supporting the bill, Rachel Richards from Michigan League for Public Policy. Supporting the bill, Yusuf Rabi from the Michigan Nurses Association. Supporting the bill, Todd Regis from United Food and Commercial Workers Local 951. Supporting the bill, Aaron Squeo from United Food and Commercial Workers Local 876. Supporting the bill, Jeremy Garza from Michigan Pipe Trades. Supporting the bill, Beth Kelly Bird from SEIU Michigan. Supporting the bill, Ryan Siebold from Michigan AFL-CIO. Opposing the bill is Jimmy Green from the Michigan Minority Builders Association. Opposing the bill is Amanda Fisher from the NFIB. Opposing the bill is Steve DeLee from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Opposing the bill, Vanessa Williams from Kelly Services. Opposing the bill, Pete Doyle from True Blue. Opposing the bill, Adam Carlson from the Michigan Hospital Association. Opposing the bill, Mike Johnston from the Michigan Manufacturers Association. Opposing the bill, John McNamara from the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association. And opposing the bill, Maria Enriquez from the UAW Local 6000. With no other testimony being presented, I'll take a motion to excuse any absent member. And Representative Wagella makes that motion. Be no further business before this committee. We stand adjourned. That's what it says.